It's truly a great honor for me to be able to stand here to talk with you under his name. So today I'm going to share with you my thought on the so-called new era. All right. But I want to start with China's economy because I'm an economist, right? So if we look into the news, particularly, say, the Western media, probably every piece of news is talking about the decline of China, okay? So I just happened to check the New York Times recent pieces. I think this is the most recent one written by Krugman, right? Why is China in so much trouble? This one is really alarming. How do we manage China's decline? Not even China's recession, but China's decline, right? You know how what that word means, right? Decline. And then problems with China's economy, how scary is China's crisis? You know, you name it, it's all about the crisis in China, right? So if we look at the data over the last several years, China's economy has kind of on a really difficult road. Growth rates declined from about 7% to barely 2% during COVID time, right? So many sectors have been targeted by government policy, right? And those sectors had a huge decline, and that had a huge impact on the economy. Okay, so people ask the question, why? Why, the Chinese economy has been in such a difficult time? Okay, if you look at those ratings, right, they're going to point out causes that are related to long-term trajectory of the Chinese economy. Now, for example, Krugman has a series of the dilemma of thrift. Chinese people save too much. China consume too little. Okay. Of course, China is one of the countries with heaviest savings. So before COVID, the saving rate was 45%. During the COVID time, the saving rate increased by 2 percentage points. So right now it's about 47%. It's huge, right? What is the saving rate in the United States? About 18%. Okay, so that's the difference of it. Chinese people do save a lot. But that actually ignored one fact. That is before the financial crisis, China's saving rate was even higher. It was the highest point was 52%. So after the crisis, the financial crisis, actually China's saving rate dropped quickly, okay, from 52% to 45%. So that's remarkable, right? Yes, there is a lack of consumption, but before COVID, consumption increased quite dramatically. Okay. Now, aging, many people say, hey, look, Chinese population is declining. Aging is going to slow down the Chinese economy. Yes, in the long run, probably that's going to happen. But in the short run, we actually face the reverse problem. That is, we worry about unemployment, right? You all heard about the unemployment rate of youth. What is 22% or something? The government actually worry about unemployment, okay, not the lack of labor. At least in the short run, we are going to have still, right, at least the structural unemployment. Many people don't know that the adoption of AI and automation is the fastest in China among all countries. Okay, so to give you one figure, So the World Economic Forum, so-called Davos Forum, identifies so-called model factories. And basically, it's called the 暗夜工厂. It's a dark factory. You don't need any people. Okay, so right now on the list there are about 140. Do you know the number in China? 50. Okay, so China accounts for about 40% or even higher, right? So the adoption of automation is so fast in China. That's going to replace a lot of labor, right? And I really don't think aging is going to affect China's supply. Consumption, probably a little bit, health, social security, old age security, probably are going to be a problem, but that's not in the short term. Lack of confidence on the part of private entrepreneurs, yes. But what are the causes, right? We have to think about the causes with the lack of confidence. Worsening international environment, yes, right? Because the U.S. export control on China. There is a huge chilling effect. The real impacts are small, right? Because the United States adopted this policy called the small yard, high fence, right? So the area of restriction is quite small, but the chilling effect is big. Okay? But even on that front, the impacts are mainly in the high-tech sector, right? Not economy-wide. Okay. For example, U.S. Commerce Department has a so-called entity list, right? On the list, China has about 700 companies, institutions, also, right? And those entities cannot get high-tech products from the United States. But do you know how many companies, registered companies in China? More than 20 million, right? So the percentage is really small, okay? I don't think that explains China economy slow down, okay? And also, even in long run, we have to think about the potentials of the Chinese economy. Okay. Actually, over the last decade or so, China has been moving really fast. So-called middle range technology. Okay. So how big is China's manufacturing sector? It's actually over 30% of the total. You add the United States, Japan, Germany together, the sum is smaller than Chinese manufacturing sector. Okay, and the economy is huge, particularly the manufacturing sector. China is also moving to become the world's largest car exporter. This year, definitely, China is going to take over Japan to become the largest car exporter. Okay, so in the middle range industries, China definitely now is number one in terms of size and also in terms of some key technologies. Okay. Even in more advanced technologies, China does not lag behind. AI, alternative energy, EVs. And many people say, hey, you're exaggerating because think about those, what's it called, the LLC, right? ChatGPT, right? So United States has ChatGPT, right? China has what's it, 文心一言 by Baidu, right? It's about 1.5 generation behind ChatGPT, okay? But that's fine, okay? In terms of application, China is far ahead of any other country. Okay, to give you one small example, recently my wife said, "Oh, we need to change our laws." of our doors. So now we can use face image to open our door, right? But it's sort of, my God, right? Several years ago, it was only on sci-fi films, right? But I can use my face to open my door. Alternative energy, in terms of solar energy, the solar panel, what's the share of Chinese product? 90%, more than 90% of solar panel equipment, right, are produced either in China or by Chinese companies in other countries. Okay, wind power, almost the same story. EVs, China's EV output is 60% of world total, 8 times US, 8 times US, right? So this year, probably we are going to sell at least 9 million EVs, okay, 30% of total sales. And you think about kind of future technologies. China does not lag behind. Fusion, quantum computing, quantum communication, photonic chips, China does not lag behind. Okay, and probably in some areas, we are going to see China lead the world. We're likely, right? So talking about the China's potentials of the current growth, I remain optimistic, okay? I don't think much of the talk inside China or outside China about the future of China's economy is valid. So then how do I explain this slowdown of the Chinese economy, right? So this is the essence of my talk today. So my theme is here. China's economic slowdown has been a result of the new era's conscious right, effort to correct the dire consequences of the 40 years of reform. Okay, the new era is a period of time of correction, and the correction often comes with a cost, right? And the cost is represented by economic slowdown. So that's the theme of my talk today. Should I allow a question in between or at another?
It's up to you. Normally we do it at the end, but if
okay, if you have a pressing question, feel free to ask. Well, of course, I'm going to leave time for Q&A. Okay. Okay, so that's my theme. Now, so I have been thinking about the reform and opening here. Because this year is going to mark the 45 anniversary of reform and opening, right? I don't think we're going to have a huge celebration in China because this is a different time now, right? But intellectuals do reflect on the history of reform and opening, and gradually, actually, at that period of time, is becoming a topic for historians, right? History of reform and opening. My thinking, to an extent, has been framed by this book, The Fourth Turning, right? The book, never a profit book, right? Written by two scholars in the late 1990s, okay? And I just checked online, I just found out a new book by one of the authors, another author died, okay? So they propose a kind of a strange theory to interpret American history. To put it short, they believe that in American history, there have been cycles of 8 years. So every 8 years, there was a cycle, right? And within each cycle, there are 4 periods. A high period, then weakening, unraveling, then crisis. And by their theory, today, United States in the crisis period. And actually, this new book is about the coming crisis in the United States. Sounds like familiar, right? But the most scary thing is that the two authors said at the end of each crisis period, there was a total war, right? Either domestic war or international wars. So the last two, one is Civil War, one was two World War. Okay, so I'm not an expert on American history. I just found out that book is really fascinating. So on this trip, I ordered this book again. But using that, if you think about China, surprisingly, I found this theory is really applicable to Chinese history, okay? At least the recent history. Think about the Mao's period, right? That's kind of a high period, at least before the Great Famine, right, in the 1950s. Right? A high period means the country has kind of a central ideology. Everyone submits to that. Believe the country is going to have a bright future, right? And everyone works harder for that future. And everyone enjoys their life. Okay, that's the high period. Okay, that's the modern period of time. But of course, after the Great Famine, there were mistakes after mistakes. But still, ideally, right, it's still China's a high period. Okay, a new chapter was open for Chinese history. Okay, then that's the next is the Dengzi period of time. And when you look at the Chinese history and apply their theory to Chinese history, I was just surprised, right? Deng Xiaoping died exactly 20 years after he assumed the power in China, right? Exactly 20 years. But that's the reform period of time in China, a weakening, okay? What we call the new enlightenment, right? My generation is the generation of the 1980s, okay? We went through that. That's a truly a period of enlightenment, okay? And then we come to the ruling period, 1998 to 2017. That's a period of time of indeterminacy in China, right? Anything goes, and there is no direction for China, okay? That's also the period of time I want to talk a lot about. Like, in this period of time, China had a lot of problems, and Xi Jinping wanted to correct those problems. Okay. So I set the starting point of the new era to 2018, not 2012, only because, for one thing, for the sake of theory, right? 20 years, 20 years. But that's the most substantial, I think, it was until the 19th Party Congress did Xi Jinping assume absolute power in China. We know that in 2018, the Constitution was revised, right? The Constitution got rid of the term limit for the president. The explanation was, the party secretary actually doesn't have a term limit, right? So if the presidency has a term limit, then they are not comparable. Okay. So I think starting from 2018, when Xi Jinping assumed absolute power in the party or in the country, did the new era really begin. Okay. So as I said, the new era is a period of correction. Okay, so let's then go back to the reform period, the first 20 years of reform period. As I said, this is the awakening time, right? The period of enlightenment. Okay, of course, I don't need to get into the details of reform and opening. I think even young students sitting over here, you know something about the reform and the opening, right? Here, I just want to emphasize two things, right? What it meant for opening, what it meant for reform. Okay, for opening, that's basically open to the West. Okay, first of all, open to Western ideas, political ideas, economic ideas, and the social ideas. And that's why we call that period of time a new period of enlightenment. Right? We need enlightenment. Right? I mean, I went to Peking University in 1982. That was kind of the golden age of Peking University, or for the country at large. Okay, we read almost every book that we could get from the West. Right? I still remember there is a book series called 走向未来丛书. Right? You know that? That's a small white cover, right? Really small. Most of those books were translated from West, widely copyrighted, okay? For sure, right? But that's good, right? For intellectual exchanges, that's actually, if the authors knew this, they could be more than happy to see that, okay? I still remember in my monthly stipend was only 34 yuan, but I could still spend some money to buy books. Okay, and we read a lot. Okay, absorb everything we could. Okay, and then on the ground, that's to adopt practice used to be reserved for capitalism. Okay, right? Start from Shenzhen, Deng Xiaoping began to try capitalism. Okay, right, and gradually spread out to the whole world, and the whole country and so on. And also work on foreign investment. Okay, in the very early stage, foreign investment was work on. Even today, when you go to China, and go through those great shopping malls, I don't know if you noticed, almost every store has an English name, even today, right? But of course, many of the English names are awkward. Still, okay, that's very different from, say, India. Although India is an English-speaking country, you go to India, actually on the street, there are not many English signs as you expect. Okay. What about reform? Reform basically means almost anything goes. You try anything, right? And because of that, kind of we find that the emergence of civil society was forming in China. And inside all those changes, I think two things were really important, right, for China to make those changes. One is pragmatism, right? That the party adopt a new philosophy, pragmatism, pretty much like American pragmatism. Okay, before reform, right? The Communist Party emphasized on theory. Okay, so before reform, there was consistent theory Marxism. Okay, and if Marx didn't say anything, then you could not do it. Pragmatism changed us. Right? Pragmatism means basically two things. Okay, of course, it's a philosophy, right? It's complicated, but to me, it can be boiled down to just two things. One, there's no internal truth. Okay? 实践是检验真理唯一标准. Practice is the only way to test the truth. Okay? Second, ends proceed means. Right? You first think of whether your ends are sound. Then you choose the means. Not the other way around. And before the reform, right, means preceded the ends. Right? So 您要社会主义的好，不要资本主义的。So we prefer socialist grass than capitalist what's that? Wheat or something. Okay. So one example is Deng's argument for the market, right? So even in that period of time, China or the party still claim that China is a socialist country, but why a socialist country adopt the markets? Right? Because before market there was reserved for capitalism, but of course that was wrong, right? Even when human civilization began thousand years ago, market existed. Okay, but before reform, that was kind of received the wisdom, right? Market was something for capitalism. Socialism should not have the market. Okay, so Deng said, no. Socialism can also adopt the market. And boom, right? That just liberate the Chinese people. So that's one key element. The other one is CCP, that comes to the party, turned back to China. That's awkward or paradoxical, right? The comes the party of China, why it needs to come back to China. But don't forget, the Communist Party was a product of Westernization in China. Right? The party always said, oh, we don't want the Westernization of China. But the party itself was a product of Westernization because it received a radical idea from the West, right? Marxism, as Mao said, and recently AER paper, no, JPE paper, Journal of Political Economy paper, actually showed Marxism didn't have huge impact in the West or in China before the Russian Revolution. It was the Russian Revolution that spread Marxism, right? And Mao actually said this, right? 十月革命一声炮响，给中国送来了马克思列宁。But because of the Russian Revolution, Chinese intellectuals suddenly found, oh my God, there is one radical idea that can ignite the revolution in China, right? And provide a total solution to China's problem. What was China's problem at that time? China was weak, China was invaded, Chinese people, Chinese culture were backward. And we need to change this. How are we going to change this? We are going to adopt the most radical idea in the world to change it. Okay, right? But after a long time, when reform began, you're not going to do revolution again. In Chinese words, you have to do construction, 建设, right? So in that case, you have to give up Marxism. Okay, at least the radical parts of Marxism, right? And where will the party find the new wisdom? China's own culture, own political tradition. Okay, so that's why I say, the party turned back to China. I don't have time to talk about my own research, but actually my own research is on Chinese government officials, the promotion system. So internationally, there's the debate about the meritocracy in China, whether the Chinese system is meritocratic, right? But we use a lot of study, not providing a lot of evidence to show that the Chinese system, the party system, is meritocratic. That is, on average, government officials are being promoted based on merits. Okay, so that's a part of the Chinese history. Key part of Chinese history. Okay. So because of that, China became what I call an unconventional developing country. What is a conventional developing country? I studied development economics. Okay, so a conventional developing country is featured by political monopoly, a few people, a few families just monopolize politics. Okay, and that's actually one of the key problems in many developing countries. Think about Philippines. Do you know in 1978, what's the fraction of Chinese income in Philippine income? 1/5. Only 1/5. Today, China's per capita income is more than 3 times Philippine income. Okay, and most people agree that the underdevelopment or slow development in the Philippines is because of its political structure, right? Although it has on the face as a democratic system, but we all know the politics is controlled by a few families. Okay. Business political alliances, right? When businesses become large, the first instinct for those business people is what? Protect the government, right? So that's going to make the business easier to do. You monopolize the business, okay? That's also observed in most developing countries. And widespread spread of corruption. In many developing countries, they're so-called petty corruption, right? Small corruption. But in some countries, corruption is much bigger. Okay. Everywhere, okay, and high inequality, okay, right? And we always talk about the U.S. Become more unequal, but compared with those developing countries, yeah, okay, yeah, much more equal than most developing countries, right? What's the Gini coefficient in the United States? 0.47, right? In most developing countries, it's about 0.5. Or even higher. Okay. But in the first 20 years of reform and opening, China was kind of more unconventional developing country. Right? And so China didn't have those problems. Now, why? First, because the Mao's era created an equal society. No dominant social classes in China, right? Although we don't agree with the means Mao used. But eventually, Mao created a completed, equalized, and even society. And another one was that, just like my generation, we were aspired for a new life, right? There's a new future for us. So no time for corruption or anything. Of course, there's no strong business at that time in China. Okay. So that's kind of the golden time for China. Okay, and the next 20 years, things on the one hand, but even better. That is, China's growth rate went up. Right? China's high growth period of time was the first decade of the century. Okay, most of China's wealth was accumulated in that period of time. But on the other hand, in that period of time, China began to accumulate a lot of problems. And then China was on the way to become a conventional developing country. Okay. So let's see, what were the problems? The first one was alarming inequality. Our unit is like a nationwide data every other year, so we know well how income distribution involved in the country. So here I only provide one set of numbers. The lowest 10% of population in China only owns 0.5% of income. What's the number in US? I think must be higher. I know the lowest 50% of US population owns about 35% of total income. In China, 70%. All right. So China is much more unequal society than US. In terms of wealth, the lowest 10% actually has a negative wealth. Okay, they are borrowing to get by. What about the highest 10%? The highest 10% owns 35% of national income and 68% of national wealth. So that's the kind of inequality in China. Second, widespread corruption. Right. Corruption is a cancer in any country, but in China, it has become so big, so widespread. Okay. I'm going to give you data. It's just alarming. Just alarming. Sometimes I feel really pessimistic about the future of China in terms of eradicating corruption. Right? After 10 years of anti-corruption drive, we still see a lot of corruption in China. And many of those kind of officials, before they assumed that their position, already decided to get a bribery. Or to put it another way, they want to become government official only because they want to take a bribery. I know several cases of this, recent cases, right? So this makes me really feel bad about Chinese culture. Is that the part of Chinese culture? Okay. But in terms of the start of corruption, I would say that two reasons. First, faster growth just to raise the appetite of government officials. Okay. The salaries of government officials in China are relatively low. For example, officials in the Ministry of Education, they earn only a fraction of our salary. Our salary can be 3 times, even 4 times their salary. Okay. So when they, are in a banquet with those business people, and the business people, when you eat with them, one meal can cost easily 100,000 yuan. Easily, right? That's about, at that time, 20 years ago, that's actually about the annual income, or even more than annual income of a government official, decent government official. Okay, so it's really tempting, right, to take a bribery. Okay, and also the government has been commercialized, right? I talked with government officials, they say, "Oh, what's the difference between us and those business people? Right? They're doing business. We are also doing business. We're trying to get business into our city, right? So if we are doing business, it's very easy for government officials to think we are providing kind of service, and those services should be paid back, right? So another problem is the fragmentation of the party. Jim Oil, a political scientist in Stanford, appointed this fragmented authoritarian regime almost 30 years ago. But at that time, she meant to say the state was fragmented. China actually has the most decentralized economic system in the whole world, physical system in the whole world. Okay, right? Local governments have a lot of power even today. So at the surface is a kind of a centralized authoritarian system. But if you look into the system, you'll find it's hugely decentralized. That actually caused a lot of problems in China, although it also gives local government officials huge incentives to develop the local economy. But entering the second 20 years of reform, the problem became even worse, right? At that time, we called the 9 members of the Standing Committee of Politburo, 九龙治水. There were 9 dragons in the Standing Committee, and each dragon was in charge of a certain business in the party, and the other people could not mess up with him. So think about the Zhou Yongkang. Zhou Yongkang now is in jail. He was sentenced death, right, with 2-year parole. So which means he's going to be in jail forever until he dies. Okay, he was in charge of the paramilitary, the internal security force, and the police force. And he was so powerful. We all know the incident, right? In 2012, when Wang Lijun escaped into the Chengdu consulate, American consulate, Zhou Yongkang ordered the paramilitary to circle the consulate. Okay, but it was almost a civil war. The party was fragmented. Right, but that was a lesson. Okay, collective leadership met as a bottleneck. Right? So after Deng Xiaoping or after Mao Zedong, collective leadership was emphasized as one of the key principles of the party. But at that time, it faced a huge challenge. Okay, so inside the party, almost anything goes. That's really dangerous for the party. And also the rise of business political alliance, right? I sense that many Chinese business people with this Hu Xueyan dream. Hu Xueyan, this guy, was a businessman at the end of Qin Dynasty, right? He was also a government official. Some people were, right? The high-ranking government officials. I think he's a businessman. Okay, he controlled a huge amount of business. Well, of course, the end to him was not that bad. That was really bad. You know, the government confiscated all his belongings, and he died in suffering. Okay, but the people don't remember his end, but enjoy his story. There was actually a TV series called Hu Xueyan, praising him. Okay, right? So I tell you, many, not all, many business people, when their business become large, they want to become Hu Xueyan. Okay, Guo Wengui now is in American jail, right? Is one of them. Another one is the Evergrande CEO, what was his name? Xu Jiaying. Yeah, Xu Jiaying is another one. I can name many more. Okay. And also excessive commercialization, the educational sector. Okay. Of course, you know, to ask the market to provide education has done a lot of good things to China, particularly in tertiary education, right? And also in high school education, and even in some compulsory education. But because of commercialization, total commercialization of the educational sector, you know, we have created kind of a parallel system besides the school system, the so-called extracurricular training. Right, so you have one first grade in school. There's another one first grade in a company. Okay, so everyone becomes so nervous. Right? So you talk with young moms. Many of my female students have become moms. At the dinner table, there's only one topic, that's their children's education. Right? Everyone becomes so anxious about children's education. And most of the kids only know how to take exams. It's destroying the future of China. Okay. The financial sector, right? High leverage, excessive financialization. Okay. Particularly between 2012 and 2018, it's a huge rise of the financial sector. And that set alarm to many government officials, particularly Xi Jinping himself. I guess he didn't like that. And also, many top leaders take that as a sign of China's Americanization, right? And we should learn from United States how to do innovation, and we should not learn from United States doing finance. Finance is too much in the United States. That's one of the lessons, those top leaders have learned. The housing sector, for top leaders, too much trouble in the sector, and the sector has absorbed too much resource. Okay. And local government's commercial debts is also a huge problem. Okay. And I can list more and more. So this raises a question, I think also an academic question, right? Where's the boundary between the market and the government? So then that comes to a new area, right? What Xi Jinping intended to do, okay? So in mind of the new era leaders, particularly in the mind of Xi Jinping, right? Don't get me wrong, I don't know Xi Jinping in person, right? But we have to learn Xi Jinping's writing. It's serious, reading his writing and his speeches. Okay, I think that's important. It's a public intellectual and also an economist. I have to read his writings. So I'm kind of reading his mind. Okay. So I think he believes those problems are just intolerable. Okay, right? The fate of the party and a healthy economy are at stake. Well, without correcting those problems, the party is going to break up. And one day, probably the party is not going to be there. Okay. So the aim, this is purely my reading, is kind of going back to the 1950s to rebuild China's high period. And it's in spiritual term. Not exactly 1950s, because 1950s, we had a command economy, right? No more. I don't think Xi Jinping wants China to adopt command economy. Market economy is still China's future. China still opened up to the world. Right? Xi Jinping always say this. Okay, but at the spiritual side, I think his generation still believe that's the best time for China, right? All the people have the same ideology. All the people have the same goal. All the people work together toward that same goal, right? That's the high period. So how to correct those problems? To which campaigns? Okay, so that's the method. Okay, because and then one of my advisors in Wisconsin is a Harvard graduate, Edward Freeman, and he told me we social scientists have theories for almost everything, except two things. One is that why a country doesn't have military coups like India? Why a country always has military coups like Thailand? Okay, we don't have a convincing theory. Another thing is the eradication of corruption. Why corruption went away in the United States? Right? Some people say, oh, because of progressive movement. That's probably not the only reason. Right? Actually, we don't have a convincing theory about that. Okay? I think in his mind, although he has never read the writings of Freeman, right? But probably he had the right sense. Right? To eradicate the corruption, probably you need a campaign. And also to correct other problems, probably you need a campaign. Okay. Rule of law is seen as ineffective. Okay. That because rule of law took a long time to establish in the first place, and it's too slow, right? And also short pains are better than long pains. I think in top leaders' mind, if say we adopt a rule of law institutions to solve those problems, then China is going to enter a period of slow pains, long pains. And in the mind, then let's have a short pain. Okay, then we correct all the problems, and then we're going to have a brighter future. Okay, so for the sake of time, then let me go a little bit quicker, right? So first, anti-corruption drive, right? So that's we actually has a paper on this, and so this is a kind of a transformation of the governance model from what we call permissive model to a punitive model. All right, so now economic growth is not the first priority to promote a government official. Loyalty to the party is the first priority. Okay. How many people have been prosecuted? Around 4.6 million. To put it into perspective, what's the number of counterparty in China? Close to 90 million, which means 5% of party members have been prosecuted. And what's the number of public servants in China? Only 8 million, which means more than half of public servants have been prosecuted. That's alarming, right? But still, so in the first half of this year, 258,000 people have been persecuted. Actually, more than the average of the last 10 years. So, yeah, to eradicate corruption, you probably need a campaign, but where is the end? Right? That's always in people's mind. And when you have this anti-corruption drive, sector by sector, right? Recently just on the pharmaceutical, medical sector. Okay. Next, probably the legal system. The next, probably the educational system. Okay. Right. So that's the question. We all talk about the confidence of private business. Right. So if we have this anti-corruption drive, sector by sector, it's really hard for people to build kind of a confidence, right, in the economy. But in the mind of the top leaders, they would say, hey, this is just a short pain, right? We are going to take it. The second is to restore the authority in the party. First, the authority of the top leader. That's the lesson, hard lesson learned. from the whole period of time. I think particularly because of the Zhou Yongkang incident. Okay, so that so this is my understanding why power should be concentrated in the hand of just one person, the party secretary and the president of the country, and of course the chairman of the military committee. Right, so kind of the trinity. Okay, right, to avoid a catastrophic consequence like Yugoslavia. I don't know how many people know how Yugoslavia went apart, right? With Tito, with the leader. But after his death, he said, no, I'm not going to pick up the successor, so you guys just rotate. Now that system only worked for, I don't know, 3 years or something, right? And broke out. So that's the first thing. The second is the authority of the central party organs, right? The decentralization is so deep in China, and local governments had gathered a huge amount of power. Okay, it's similar to the housing market sector. The central government always want to control housing prices, but local governments didn't want to do it. Even today, when the housing market dropped by 2.5 years now, you don't see the prices coming down. Why? Because local government don't want to allow prices to come down. Okay, over the last 20 years, between the central government and local governments almost always won the game. Yeah. So Xi Jinping wants to strengthen the authority of the center, right? And the means he used has been inspections. Okay. For example, in our university, every 3 years we got an inspection. So 3 years ago we got one. We almost finished. Then this year we got another. Okay. So to do what? To align your ideas, your behavior with the center. Okay. But of course, there are negative impacts, so-called dumping, right? So local government officials just lay down. They don't have any incentives. Okay, everyone plays safe. Let me tell you a story. Sometimes it's too dry to talk about abstract notice. Tell you the real story, but it's really hard to even imagine when you write a novel, right? They are not to write such things, but it really happened in reality. It was a county in south part of the Shanxi province, my home province. Okay, so there was an accident on a highway. A tractor of chemicals brought up. Okay, so there was a fire. Normally in the past, what do? You send fire engines, right? Put off the fire, that's it. But today, no. You write a report to the city, and the city writes a report to the province. The province writes a report to the central government. Everyone actually really swiftly writing reports. Okay? Even the central government sends an expert, right? But none of them goes to the ground, right, to see the burning track. They stay in the countryside discussing the plan, how to put off the fire for 7 hours. After 7 hours, they come up with a plan and say, let's go. Then people report back, you don't need to go because the fire is out. Right? That's actually the reality on the ground. And because local government officials play safe, now of course the SOEs are favored. You give resources to SOEs, you're not going to get into any trouble. But if you give resources to a private company, if that company fails, you are going to be responsible. Okay. Next is to remove business political alliances, right? We know that China's ICT sector is slowing down, so-called platform company, right? Because there is kind of an anti-monopoly drive over there, okay? I don't think that is the real reason. The real reason is some of the owners of those big tech companies had the 胡雪岩 dreams. Okay, that's the true reason. Okay. But of course, there are negative consequences. Slowdown of the ICT sectors. Actually, China, the ICT sector was ahead of the United States before 2018. But then look at the last 5 years, China lagged behind again. And the slowdown the capital market, because capital market needs big news, right, to boost the sales, boost the prices. And because the slowdown ICT sector, then the capital market just loses all of the news. Correcting excessive commercialization, deleveraging the financial sector, getting rid of P2P, downsizing, shadow banking, all sorts of things. Downsizing the actual curriculum training sector, hooking out the housing bubbles in 2021. Okay, and I'm going to show data because that affects today China's recovery. And restricting local government's commercial debts. Okay. But of course, that has caused a lot of disruptions in the economy. Look at the housing sector. Sorry, I am put the English here, but it's clear. So this is the sales floor areas, right? So, China's recovery during the pandemic was actually quite good, right? At the end of 2020, early part of 2021 was really good. And you see the housing sales just shoot up, okay? And then the government began to not crack down, to restrict that sector severely, okay? Basically, dramatically reduced credit supply to that sector. But the housing sector needs a lot of credits. Without the credit flow into that sector just dies off. Okay. So you see the sales just turned negative. This is a growth, annual growth, year-on-year growth. And this is investment, the same story, right? This is the sources of finance just turned negative growth. Okay, so this is one of the key reasons why the Chinese economy is a slowdown this year. The housing sector accounts for 17% of Chinese GDP. Okay, so when that sector slows down, then the whole economy slows down. People talk about the lack of consumption, but if you go to China, you go to a restaurant, it's full. Right? You go to the train station, it's packed, fully packed. It's very difficult to get the train ticket now. Okay, but that kind of consumption has a ceiling, right? But when you buy a house, your consumption is in millions. Okay. All right, so you look at this negative growth, which means the consumption is growing negatively. Right, you need a lot of other kind of consumption to make up for the loss. I don't show you local governments. Local governments have the same problem. Backman, the dean of the School of Management in Tsinghua University, estimated that over the last 3 years, local governments have accumulated 4 trillion deficits, 4 trillion RMB in deficits, right? So almost all the local governments have tightened up their belt, cutting salaries, okay, to their employees, cutting investment, okay. So, when you have 2 large sectors contracting, can you imagine your economy to grow? No way. That's the current situation in China, right? So the slowdown, in a sense, is engineered by government policy, not because the Chinese economy itself is bad, okay? Last one, eradication of poverty and the common prosperity, okay? Right, so in 2021, the party claimed the victory of poverty alleviation, right? China got rid of absolute poverty, but what's the next? The next is common prosperity, right? That's one of the so-called Tuxin, the initial conviction, right, of the CCP, okay? I think that's going to be one of the key themes for China in the next several decades. But because there's a lack of theory, how are you going to talk about the common prosperity? Because Marxism is still the main theory that the party holds. So when party propaganda talks about common prosperity, it has to use Marxism to talk about it. That's really awkward, because by Marxism, in the end, China is going to become what? Communism, which means all the private properties will be confiscated into the hands of the state, right? So that's why 2 years ago, when common prosperity was announced, private business people, as well as middle-class people, were so worried. Okay, so that's my interpretation of the new era. Not all. I can also talk about reducing the influence of Western ideas, right? All sorts of things. Okay, but those things that I've talked about, I think they have more implications for the Chinese economy. And I think if you pick my explanations, probably you're going to have better understanding why the Chinese economy is slowing down. Let me conclude by talk about several things, right? One is the campaigns, okay? To me, many of the problems I have just talked about are structural. They are embedded in China's economic and political system, right? So can we really use campaigns to change them, right? That's still an open question to me. Yeah, probably the leaders prefer short pains to longer term pains, but short-term pains may have long-term implications. Furthermore, the economy is so bad, people don't have confidence in the Chinese economy, then people are going to move their money away. They're going to immigrate to other countries, right? So that becomes kind of a long-term pains for China. So in a sense, you create a long-term pains, not to avoid long-term pains. And also, of course, campaigns and hamper the rule of law, right? In the end, we still want to build a society of rule of law, but campaigns really destroy rule of law. So another question is, through those corrections, will China review the kind of a high period? Right? Because, in my reading, I think the aim of those corrections is what? To build a new China with a spiritual 1950 high period. Okay. I think it's going to fall short because China or the Communist Party by now does not have a new theory. Okay, you need a new theory, right, to frame this new high period. Okay, what is the high period? I read the introduction of Howe's new book. Right, he said the United States is going to rebuild the new society probably in 10 years' time. Okay. And then in that new society, that's hyper, another hyper of the United States. That's going to be a period of time of kind of a new egalitarian. Okay. I don't know if that's the future of the United States, but at least you have to submit to a new theory, right, for the whole country. What about China? What about the Communist Party? Okay. I think that now the Communist Party is caught in a dilemma. On the theoretical front, the party still holds Marxism as its orthodox. Okay, so the party's language, their own theoretical language, is still Marxist language. Okay, but of course, Marxism doesn't apply to China. Okay, everyone knows this. It doesn't apply. Okay, it's obsolete. Most of it. Okay. And then in practice, actually the party has adopted traditional Chinese political thought. For example, meritocracy is adopted for the management of government officials. Pragmatism actually is part of the Chinese traditional values. Okay, right? So you look at the the behavior of the party, it's almost a continuation of older China, right? So that's the second. Third one, more problematic, is that when the party speaks out toward the rest of the world, they have to adopt what I call a democratic narrative, right? For example, the newest theory is 全国通民主, all process of democracy. No one knows what is all process of democracy. Now, so that's because there is a poverty of theory, right? The party doesn't have its own theory, so when it speaks out to the rest of the world to use the democratic language. Which doesn't describe China's reality. And it has used love, right? I think the world with love. Okay. So that's the problem. How to solve this problem? Without solving those problems, I don't think we are going to get into kind of a new high curve. Okay. Okay, so that's my talk, a little bit long. If you read Chinese, you feel free to scan our WeChat. We have a follower of 300,000. Okay.
So, Professor Yao, thank you very much for that. I think those were quite provocative comments in terms of providing a different understanding than what's in the Western media of what's happening in the Chinese economy, and particularly the argument that much of this slowdown is intentional to correct for the problems of especially the last 20 years of reform. We're going to open up to questions. I just want to announce we have this room until 5:45, so we can have our usual standard half-hour questions, but if anyone needs to leave for class, if you could quietly do so out the door to the back or to the side, and if anyone needs to leave now, feel free to do so. I will get us started with the questions, just asking a simple question, especially recognizing that you're a prominent development economist. Late-stage development theory suggests that normally increasing political surveillance and increasing censorship is not compatible with late-stage development.
Mhm.
So do you interpret the current trends of increasing surveillance, increasing censorship, as this is just temporary to the campaign? Or do you see this as yet another element of how China is trying to be an unconventional developing country in the late stage development?
That's actually not a simple question. It's a really hard question. Of course, I hope that it's temporary, right? But I truly believe that in design, it was designed as a temporary, right? I mean, Xi Jinping talks about the rule of law, and then we have a plan to build a country of the rule of law by 2035, right? So the long-term goal is still China is going to become that kind of a country. But the problem, of course, as I said, if you use campaign to eradicate all the problems, then it's going to make the rule of law even harder to build, right? I think that's the danger of it.
Would you like to call on individuals, or would you like me to call on them?
Either way.
Okay, so if you have a question, if you please raise your hand. Again, I just wanted to remind you, please, we do require that you identify yourself before you ask your question. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Okay, so,
thank you, Danielle, for very insightful comments and arguments. My name is Edward. I'm from the East Department. My question is on the anti-corruption and economic prosperity. So the anti-corruption and the anti-monopoly crackdown that you mentioned helps to foster the so-called economic prosperity. And the numbers being executed, although being going up, however, the jail time for the penalty is going down and more like it's more like alternative instead of the actual effect of the people going to jail. That might help the prosperity in terms of like the tax rate, the more tax revenue and less corruption in the economy. But why don't the governments provide fiscal stimulus to the very basic people, like many of the other countries would have done during the pandemic? And why would China, during the time when it's exiting the pandemic, not providing such safety nets to the very basic, to the very humble and those people who lost jobs, as you mentioned, a lot of unemployed people? Does that not fit into the common prosperity, or is that simply a policy mismanagement?
First of all, I don't think the objective of anti-corruption drive was a common prosperity. No, it's just a cancer in the economy, in the society, in the party. And it has to be taken away, okay, for the sake of itself. You asked the question why the Chinese government didn't give people money. Actually, over the last 3 years, I have been calling for the government to give cash to ordinary people. Probably you didn't notice, last May last year, Premier Li Keqiang actually said this very openly. And he said, China is still a developing country. China is not at a stage like the United States, developing countries to give people cash, right? The central government is not going to do this. But if the local governments, you have money, you can do that, right? So that's the answer, okay? I think many people still don't understand the Chinese leadership still hold a really conservative view about fiscal spending, about monetary expansion. Probably the Chinese government is one of the most conservative in terms of a fiscal expansion and monetary expansion. Okay, so that I think that's also one of the reasons why the government didn't give cash to ordinary people.
Thank you, Daniel, for being here and giving us the lecture. I'm Jin Bella from Harvard Kennedy School. I actually have two questions for you, if that's okay. So the first one, you mentioned like the one of the problems that we now is the business political alliances. I guess I was just wondering, like, what is the boundary or like the balance? Like, how do we value? Because you saw like the government tend to restrict like large businesses from like influencing the whole market. So what's like the boundary or criteria for doing that? And then think about like the US or other countries. There's like so much like transfer for government officials to say like the private sector to the government sector or like the nonprofit to public sector. So how do you observe that? So we have like some programs to proceed. And the second one is that you mentioned also like the big negative impact would be, you know, local officials tend to play safe and don't take initiatives or like the talking. So what's your personal opinion on that? Like if there's a way to address this problem under the conservative regime, or is it, do you think that the two things are just
for your first question, I mean, normally in other countries, say in a European country, the American practice is corruption, for sure, okay? But because it's institutionalized, it's not called corruption, okay? So that's why in China, it's not allowed. It is strictly not allowed. Government officials, when after you retire, you're not going to go to business, period, okay? But of course, there is a downside. Retirement government officials cannot even go back to teach in a university either. Okay, but the problem, I think, the problem in China or in any other developing country is not something so-called a revolving door, right? It's truly business political alliance coming together, right? It's like the Guo Gui. He could, at that time, he could swing governments, high government officials, okay, ask them to do this, to do that, right, and then terminated people by government powers, okay. So that's the kind of the business political alliance. For your second question, I don't think local initiatives are incompatible with so-called authoritarian regime. Look at China before New Year, right? The local governments had a lot of free rule to do almost everything. Okay, there's a huge literature on that. Okay, as I said, I hope that the current inspection is just a temporary. In the end, we still need the institutions, rule of law, to regulate the relationship between the central government and the local governments.
One property.
Sorry, given time, would it be okay if you please limit yourself to one? Settle hands up.
Andrew, and so the question is talking about sales. All of the former, so you presented it in ways where people obviously had to deal with. There's a lot of question over how much of it, as you said, interpreting these personal thoughts versus what has been done by any other leader that came in after the period faces problems. Would they have done the same thing given that they were eating ideas about this in the 2012 period?
That's an interesting question. I mean, if I want to give you a philosophical answer, I could say history is going to find its agent. That's a good question. That's a hard question. I don't know. That my sense is that probably my philosophical answer is correct. History is going to find another person, if not Xi Jinping. the problems were so severe in Chinese society. There must be some correction.
My question is, what do you think the central government itself problems the other economic problems you mentioned because of the consequence of the campaigns to this as a problem of the campaigns themselves, but we just think that's problem of the officials. How do you think what do you think would be the plan to improve the consequences?
The incentive of local government officials.
Yeah, like also like how insightful emails such as
in terms of what? In terms of incentive of local government officials. I see. Well, I actually in China, I have to say it's freer than you have thought, right? I dare to speak here. Believe me, people in China will listen, right? So I'm going to say the same thing in China too, okay? So, those leaders know what we say, okay? But the problem why they don't adopt our advice, right? That's your question. I think that's a question of judgment. I think in the mind is that, okay, there are pains, but they are short pains, right? We have to take those short pains. Otherwise, we're going to have long pain, right? So then they choose the short pains. That's the only thing. Many people say, hey, Xi Jinping doesn't know this, doesn't know that. Wrong. He knows everything. Don't take it wrong. The system is still there. Information flows are still there, right? It's just a matter of judgments. Okay.
Thank you. Huge, massive complicated. I have a question about the technological advancement we mentioned in the beginning of the talk on solar, wind, EV, AI. We saw a lot of growth and achievements that China currently has. But you also talk about these campaigns. In a lot of governments, we feel like they might have impact on the innovations and people strive to do that. What do you feel is the relationship between those two going forward? Do you think the government will prioritize more innovation, above everything else, or do you think those will exist at the same time and there will be some kind of balance between those two?
I mean, the purpose of the correction is to make a kind of a cleaner economy, right? And it's supposed to be more friendly to innovation. At least that's the intention, right? But of course, when we look at the consequence, probably that's a different story. For example, direct finance used to account for 30% of the total finance. I mean, in the US, that's the 70%, right? So to me, if China really wants to compete with the United States in terms of innovation, China has to adopt American system. No doubt about it, right? This functioning capital market is it's kind of precondition for high innovation, okay? But today, the percentage is not even 30%. I think now it's about 20%. At the highest point of deleveraging, it was only 7%, right? Something like that, okay? So yes, there is a kind of a balance over there. But I don't know if the top leaders have realized this or not. It seems to me the direction is still to cut the financial sector and to reduce the financialization in the economy. I don't know, we hopefully in the future someday, people finally realize, hey, we should build a solid capital market.
And my friends is too progressive than that, and it's great. So it's like, as you mentioned, she also have a certificate futures, especially 1950s. And what will be the biggest disadvantage that in and the knowledge.
Well, that's kind of a hypothetical question, right? We haven't got to that point. Okay. What did it think about the United States in the 1950s, right? Or truly, many people actually believe 1950s was kind of the golden years for the United States too, right? Because that's the high period in the United States, right? So if you can truly find it's kind of a common theory that people believe, right? Probably is going to be better for any country, okay? But of course, to preserve personal freedom, that's a precondition. I think the question actually is whether we can get to that point, right? I think if we can get to that point, probably it's going to be better than today.
Question about the housing bubble. You mentioned there has been a law struggle between central government and local government about housing. And you mentioned that the local government always won. So I was so surprised. So I wonder if you can give more details or an example of local government and actually win this lottery.
When you look at the housing prices, right? The central government always want to control the housing prices. Why housing prices are still so high, right? Particularly in first-tier cities. Ordinary people cannot afford that kind of prices, right? It's the only reason is the local governments allow high prices. To give you one example, my hometown, Xi'an, right? Housing price in Xi'an used to be very low. Okay, a fully furnished apartment. The price was 12,000 RMB per square meter. Okay, about 10 years ago, really low. But then there came a new party secretary, and he said that, oh, Xi'an's housing prices are not compatible with its status. Because Xi'an was designated as one of the 9 so-called central cities, right? So magnetic cities, okay? So he said that we need to raise the housing price. What he did was he opened up the hukou system. So as long as you have a college diploma, you can get the Xi'an hukou for free. So over like 3 years, each year more than, I don't know, 150,000 graduates went to Xi'an. And then the prices went up. That's a typical example. Because high prices are going to raise government revenues.
Thank you, Danielle. Very interesting discussion. I'm resonating with one of these. Question is, so in the last 10 years, there has been a re-centralization of power. There were a couple of things that many in the business community, both in China and outside of China, were hoping to see, such as land reform, social safety net, and personally, my favorite, property tax. And the reasons I wanted to see these were, we wanted to see stable development, and there were a lot of benefits, at least for property tax, to creating a functioning secondary market for real estate, of course, has asset velocity opportunity, which is not being captured. Why do you suppose it is that with all of the re-centralization of power that they haven't undertaken some of these things, which there seems to be a lot of support from a lot of sectors to undertake? Thank you.
Some of the reforms, we have called a phrase called the fatigue of reform, right? I'm talking about the fatigue of reform for almost 20 years now. My interpretation is that most of the major reforms were done in the 1990s anyway. And if you want to do new reform, those reforms are going to touch the core of the Chinese system, the economic system, the political system. So those reforms are becoming so difficult to undertake, okay? In terms of property tax, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the property tax is so important to have a functioning real estate market, and it can provide really key financial resources to local governments. So local governments don't rely more on high prices, okay? That's very important. But why we just don't start a property tax? I think the reason is interest groups, okay? They are so strong. Many people have so many apartments, okay? And they are against it. That's probably the only reason, okay? So you can see, even there is a huge centralization, but the party still needs to care about, the opinions of ordinary people, and also some powerful segments of the society. Okay, centralization doesn't mean centralization of everything, right? Centralization just means to solve the problem I just point out, okay? I have to say this, that centralization doesn't mean that the whole Chinese system has been centralized again. Some people say, China is going back to the planning period. No, not the case, right? The party, Xi Jinping himself, have always said, opened up to the rest of the world, reform, market economy, and still China's future, okay? There's no centralization in that sense, okay? So centralization is just for certain purpose, not the country as a whole.
万事不求人，私人助理、私人顾问时代来临了。六度万事，万事相助，超强博士群不断奉献专项服务，信息、财经、健康、文娱、教育、旅游、消费、科技、美食，让您的生活品质全线升级。六度世界现在体验，请去3w.6度.world。
限时免费期间，全体注册网友免费使用付费版的高级功能如下：支持论坛搜索，免费画图。第一步，点击右上角最左边的机器人符号开始对话，像图片中红框中的那样。第二步，如图选择六度万事，我们未来将推出更多的 AI 供大家选择。然后就可以与六博士悄悄畅谈了。还支持论坛内部信息搜索哦。您还可以让六博士做你的助手，帮你绘制漂亮图片。最后可以点击添加好友进来，一起与六博士工作。一起来3w.6度.world尝试吧。